How does an elite DEA agent, drowning in $500,000 of debt on a government salary, suddenly move into a multi-million-dollar Colombian mega mansion? The answer is terrifyingly simple. He did not use his badge to hunt the cartels. He used it to protect them. Welcome to Shadow Dossier. Today we are opening a classified file that the United States Department of Justice desperately tried to bury. This is not a story about a few missing bricks of cocaine or a bribed border guard. This is the anatomical breakdown of a perfect money laundering machine, operated from the inside of the very agency built to destroy it. Prepare yourselves for the dark truth behind the corrupted badge. Before the yachts and the blood money, there was a man suffocating under the weight of the American dream. Imagine standing on the front lines of the most violent and lucrative war in human history. The war on drugs. You are stationed in Colombia, the beating heart of the global cocaine trade. Your daily operational budget involves intercepting tens of millions of dollars in illicit cash. You are tracking private jets loaded with shrink-wrapped hundreds. You are wiretapping billionaires who treat human lives like loose change. And yet, when you go home to your heavily guarded apartment, you are drowning. Our agent had accumulated over $500,000 in personal debt, credit cards maxed out, loans piling up, a lavish lifestyle he could not afford on a standard federal government salary. The psychological contrast is absolutely brutal. By day, you are an untouchable operative wielding the absolute power of the United States government. By night, you are losing sleep over a mortgage payment. And the cartels, they know exactly how to spot a desperate man. They do not approach with guns. They approach with a lifeline. The first sin is never a massive explosion. It is a quiet whisper, a tiny compromise. It starts with looking the other way at a border checkpoint. But for an agent with top-secret clearance, the stakes are infinitely higher. He did not just take a standard bribe, he sold the ultimate weapon: unrestricted access to the classified intelligence network of the United States. He realized that the cartels did not need another hitman. They needed a shield, and a DEA badge is the ultimate shield. By crossing that invisible line, he transitioned from a law enforcement officer to a vital node in a transnational criminal syndicate. He began to structure a system so sophisticated that it operated in plain sight. Using diplomatic cover, he shielded cartel money couriers from customs inspections. He manipulated federal wiretaps and surveillance schedules to ensure that millions of dollars of cartel profits flowed safely across international borders, without raising a single red flag at the FBI or the CIA. He essentially turned the Drug Enforcement Administration into a private security firm for the very drug lords he swore to destroy. This was not just treason, it was a masterpiece of systemic manipulation. He understood that the federal government is a giant bureaucracy, and bureaucracies do not look for anomalies when the paperwork is filed correctly. So he filed the paperwork correctly. He created fake informants. He drafted phantom operational reports. He diverted DEA funds meant for undercover stings directly into cartel-linked bank accounts, under the guise of paying confidential sources. Every time the DEA thought they were funding a massive operation to take down a cartel, they were actually just financing the cartel's daily operations. The sheer audacity of the scheme is breathtaking. He was sitting in high-level briefing rooms in Washington, D.C., nodding along to strategic plans to dismantle drug routes, while simultaneously texting the exact coordinates of those routes to the men running them. The cartels loved him. To them, he was not just a corrupt cop. He was a highly sought-after financial consultant with a gun and a badge. He ensured their money was washed clean through shell companies in Miami and luxury real estate in Cartagena, all while getting paid a handsome commission for his specialized services. Let us dive deeper into the mechanics of this betrayal. Think about the level of trust placed in a federal agent deployed overseas. They are the tip of the spear. They operate in the shadows with minimal oversight because the nature of the job requires extreme autonomy. This autonomy became the perfect incubator for treason. Our agent weaponized this trust. He knew the internal protocols of the DEA better than the inspectors themselves. He knew exactly which databases triggered alarms and which ones were rarely audited. He exploited the blind spots of the intelligence community. When you control the flow of information, you control reality. He fed his superiors a carefully curated diet of low-level arrests and minor drug seizures. He gave them enough success to keep them happy, enough statistics to justify his budget and secure his promotions. But these victories were nothing more than a smokescreen, a distraction orchestrated by the cartels themselves. The cartels would sacrifice a few low-level street dealers and a few kilos of product to make their star agent look like a hero. In return, he provided them with absolute immunity. It is a brilliant and terrifying symbiosis. The DEA gets their press conferences and their seized asset photos. The cartel gets to move thousands of kilos of narcotics completely unbothered. And our corrupted agent gets rich, very rich. The debt of $500,000 vanished almost overnight, replaced by a tidal wave of illicit wealth. He was no longer just surviving. He was thriving in a world of unimaginable luxury. But wealth, obtained through betrayal, carries a heavy psychological toll. You are living a double life. Every handshake with a colleague could be the moment you are exposed. Every phone call from headquarters sends a spike of adrenaline through your veins. You are constantly balancing on a razor wire between unimaginable power and a lifetime in federal prison. To survive this mental pressure, you have to undergo a fundamental psychological shift. You have to convince yourself that you are untouchable, that you are smarter than everyone else in the room. This is the birth of the God complex. He stopped seeing himself as a public servant. He started seeing himself as the invisible hand, guiding the global underworld. He was not just an agent on the payroll anymore. He had become a vital and untouchable ghost within the narco empire. A ghost who wore a United States federal badge. The transition from a corrupted employee to a master manipulator was seamless. He realized that the Drug Enforcement Administration was a weapon, and if you control the person aiming the weapon, you control the battlefield. He began to selectively target the rivals of his cartel clients. He would use top-secret classified intelligence to orchestrate massive raids on competing organizations. The Drug Enforcement Administration celebrated these takedowns as monumental victories in the war on drugs. Headquarters praised his relentless dedication, but in reality, he was just clearing the market for his paymasters. He had successfully turned the premier anti-narcotics agency of the United States into a taxpayer-funded mercenary army for a specific cartel. This is the definition of a perfect machine. The sheer scale of this operation requires a specific type of arrogance. You have to believe that you are a god among mortals. The psychological mutation is fascinating and horrifying. he developed a severe God complex. His daily routine became a schizophrenic nightmare of extreme contrasts. Picture this. At 8 in the morning, he is sitting in a secure conference room inside the United States Embassy. He is wearing a crisp suit and taking notes on classified operational strategies. He is nodding solemnly as his superiors discuss the devastating impact of cocaine on American communities. Then, the sun goes down. By 8 at night, he is boarding a private luxury jet. He is flying to a multi-million-dollar mega mansion in Cartagena. He is drinking vintage champagne purchased with the blood money of the very people he swore to protect. He is surrounded by cartel lieutenants who treat him like royalty, because to them, he is the most valuable asset they have ever acquired. How does a system built to detect criminals fail to detect a criminal in its own ranks? The answer lies in the fundamental flaws of a massive bureaucracy. The system is entirely driven by metrics. It is driven by arrest quotas and the total weight of seized narcotics. Our corrupted agent knew exactly how to feed the beast. He gave the bureaucracy exactly what it wanted: high-profile arrests of rival cartel members, spectacular drug busts that looked great on the evening news. Because his numbers were so spectacular, the agency willingly put blinders on. They ignored the glaring red flags. They ignored the fact that a man with a documented history of severe financial distress was suddenly living like a billionaire playboy. The agency created a culture where results mattered more than integrity. As long as he was bringing in the big headlines, nobody wanted to look too closely at how he was getting them. They wanted a hero, and he gave them the illusion of one. But an illusion cannot last forever. The God complex is a dangerous drug. It makes you reckless. When you believe you are untouchable, you stop covering your tracks. You start making mistakes. Not in the complex world of international espionage, but in the mundane world of personal finance. He forgot the golden rule of surviving as a corrupted official. You can steal millions, but you cannot spend it where anyone can see it. His arrogance blinded him to the simplest vulnerability, the money trail. He started living a life that his federal salary could never justify, and he did not even try to hide it anymore. He bought custom-tailored designer suits. He purchased exotic sports cars. He flew first class across the globe and stayed in the highest-tier luxury suites. He was swiping credit cards that were being paid off by untraceable offshore accounts. He was carrying wads of cash. That smelled like the chemical residue of the jungle, laboratories. This extreme lavishness is what finally cracked the perfect machine. It was not a brilliant counterintelligence operation by a rival agency. It was the sheer audacity of a man who thought he was smarter than the forensic accountants. Every time he handed his credit card to a cashier at a luxury boutique in Miami or a high-end dealership, he was leaving a digital footprint, a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly back to his badge. He was so focused on outsmarting the drug cartels and manipulating the federal databases that he completely ignored the internal watchdogs, the Internal Affairs Division, the men and women whose sole job is to hunt the hunters. They do not carry assault rifles. They carry spreadsheets. They look for anomalies in bank statements. And an agent with a $500,000 debt who is suddenly dropping $50,000 on a weekend getaway is a massive anomaly. The silent alarm had been tripped, and the ghosts of his betrayal were finally coming to collect. The Internal Affairs Division operates in absolute secrecy. When they suspect one of their own, they do not announce it. They build a ghost file. They began to monitor his communications, not the official ones, but the burner phones he thought were secure. They tracked the tail numbers of the private jets he was boarding. They cross-referenced his official travel logs with the offshore bank transactions. The contrast was staggering. On paper, he was an agent struggling to make ends meet. In reality, he was moving millions of dollars through a sophisticated network of shell companies in the Caribbean. He had essentially set up a parallel banking system, utilizing the very techniques he was trained to dismantle. He used smurfing techniques to deposit small amounts of cash to avoid triggering federal reporting requirements. He purchased high-value assets like luxury watches and fine art to store the illicit wealth. It was a textbook money laundering operation, executed by the man who wrote the textbook. His psychological deterioration accelerated. The pressure of maintaining the God complex began to fracture his reality. He became paranoid, yet increasingly brazen. He started threatening his own cartel handlers, demanding larger cuts of the profits. He believed that because he held the keys to the federal databases, he was the one in control. He forgot that cartels do not have internal affairs divisions. They have execution squads. He was playing a suicidal game of geopolitical chess against organizations that viewed human life as a disposable resource. He thought his badge made him bulletproof. But in the underworld, a badge is just a price tag, and his price was getting too high. He was alienating the very monsters he had sworn to protect. The perfect machine was beginning to cannibalize itself. The walls were closing in from both sides. The cartels were growing tired of his extortion, and the federal government was silently weaving an inescapable net of financial evidence around him. He was a dead man walking through the halls of justice, completely unaware that the countdown to his destruction had already begun. You can outsmart the Central Intelligence Agency. You can manipulate the Federal Bureau of Investigation, but you can never, ever outsmart your own arrogance. The collapse of this criminal mastermind did not happen in a blazing shootout in the Colombian jungle. It happened quietly in an air-conditioned office. The Internal Affairs Division had gathered a mountain of financial data. Every Gucci receipt, every first-class ticket, every wire transfer to a Caribbean shell company. They had successfully wiretapped the man who was in charge of wiretapping the cartels. They tracked his movements with microscopic precision. They recorded his burner phone conversations with cartel bosses, where he arrogantly demanded more cash to protect their massive multi-ton shipments. The hunter had officially become the hunted, and he had absolutely no idea that his own colleagues were now treating him like the high-value targets he used to hunt. The operation to take him down had to be flawlessly executed. You are dealing with a highly trained federal agent who knows all the tactical takedown procedures because he practically wrote the manual on them. If he even slightly suspected that he was under investigation, he could instantly destroy classified evidence. He could compromise ongoing undercover operations. Or worse, he could simply disappear into the cartel underworld forever, shielded by the very monsters he had empowered. So, the Internal Affairs team waited for the perfect psychological moment. The climax arrived not with a heavily armed SWAT team kicking down his door in the middle of the night, but with a simple, mundane request to attend a standard briefing at the DEA Headquarters. He walked into that sterile room wearing a custom-tailored suit funded entirely by cocaine money. He expected to review operational files and hand out orders. Instead, He was met by the grim faces of his own colleagues, men and women he had worked alongside for years. The room went dead silent. There was no grand dramatic speech, just the cold, heavy metallic click of handcuffs, violently snapping around the wrists of a traitor. In that split second, the God complex completely shattered. He was no longer the untouchable kingpin of Cartagena. He was just another criminal in a federal holding cell, stripped of his badge and his power. But the true horror of this story is not that a single agent went rogue. It is the terrifying realization of how easily the system allowed it to happen for so long. His punishment ultimately felt like a desperate and calculated attempt by the justice system to cover up its own massive institutional failures. He pleaded guilty quietly, securing a significantly reduced prison sentence in exchange for his absolute silence regarding the broader systemic corruption he had so easily exploited. He was merely a defective pawn, quickly removed from a much larger and darker geopolitical chessboard. The United States government quietly swept the true magnitude of his historic betrayal under the rug to protect the fragile illusion of institutional integrity. But the catastrophic damage was already done. Cartel smuggling routes had been permanently fortified. Rival cartel factions had been violently eliminated using federal intelligence resources. And countless millions of dollars in blood money had been successfully washed into the legitimate global economy, right under the nose of Washington. This leaves us with a chilling question that the Department of Justice absolutely refuses to answer. If a man drowning in $500,000 of personal debt could flawlessly transform himself into a vital intelligence asset for the deadliest cartels on Earth, without triggering a single alarm, how many other ghosts are still out there, operating in the shadows? How many other corrupted badges are currently logging into classified government databases tonight? The war on drugs is not just being fought in the humid jungles of Colombia or on the violent streets of Mexico. It is being fought in the sterile, air-conditioned offices of Washington, D.C. And sometimes, the most dangerous and elusive enemy is the one sitting at the desk right next to you. If you want to uncover more classified files that the system desperately wants to keep buried, make sure you subscribe to Shadow Dossier. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on this unprecedented betrayal. And brace yourself for our next deep dive into the shadows. Because the truth is always darker than you think. In the next classified file, a single line of code, a massive blackout, how a group of unseen hackers paralyzed an entire nation's power grid in 14 seconds, and why the government is terrified it will happen again. You won't want to miss this on Shadow Dossier.